I'm going to show you how to create 7 super ambient chords, which are easy to create and sound great in ambient music. On the way, there may be 1 or 2 bonus chords, plus a few tips about creating ambient music. This is essentially for beginners or for anyone wanting to get started in ambient music. I've made a few videos about how to produce ambient music, and a few comments there suggested that a video like this would be useful. Now, there are obviously more than just 7 chords. We're talking about chord types, not C chords or A chords or G chords. Chord types, there are obviously more than 7 of them, but these are easy to understand, super easy to create, and they sound super ambient. Now, it will certainly help if you know something about scales and how to create chords. I went through these 2 things in a bit of detail in some of the other tutorials. Link, of course, in the description. It would be a good idea if you want a bit fuzzy about some of these things to check out the other videos. However, I will go through them, not in quite so much detail, but I will show you exactly how to form these chords. So hopefully you will be able to follow along, whatever your level of expertise. Now, after explaining the chords, I put together a short piece showing how you might use these in practice. So hopefully that will be useful as well. So if all that sounds good, let's head over to the music machine and start creating chords. So the first thing to do is to select your sound, and I have selected this one. And I'm using Vital. I've increased the attack a little bit in the release. I want you to hear each individual note as it is playing, which is why I haven't selected a chord pad, but I will give you an example of how these chords sound with a more pad-like sound, so you can see what they are more likely to sound like when you produce your own music. So the first chord I'm going to suggest is a major 6th chord. So we're going to do most of the things in the key of C. This is all the white notes. That's C major. We shall also touch on A minor. That's A natural minor. They all use the white keys, but I am also going to dive into C minor. Because I think it's a lovely key. It has 3 flats in it. Let's start with the first chord. The first chord is going to be C major 6. And we create this simply by adding a 6th to our major chord. So, just very, very briefly, if we number the keys in the scale from 1 onwards, C, that is our root notes. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can go further, 9, 10, 11, 12. We can go further than that, but for this chord, we just want number 6, which is the A. So C6 would be C major, and then we add the 6th note, and that is the sound we get. Now, one thing which I think is definitely worth bearing in mind when you're creating ambient chords is we don't want an absolute definite chord progression, not really. As Brian Eno said, it should be as easy to ignore as it is to listen to. So we don't want people listening to this wondering where the next super chord progression is going to come from. It should be nice and relaxed and gentle. People can listen to it in the background and relax to it or study to it. But by the same token, we want it to be interesting. So that is the challenge of ambient music. So this major 6th chord is interesting because although it's sort of a major chord, if we look at the notes which make it up, well, obviously we have the C major chord, but by adding the A, we have an A and a C and an E. So we have an A minor. So it's a combination of a major chord and a minor chord, which definitely softens the major effect. It's not a hard effect. Now, I did mention this in the other video, but just to recap briefly, these notes, C, E, G and A, make up the chord of C6. And we can play these notes anywhere on the keyboard. So we could play a C down here, and a G here, and an E here, and an A there, and that is still the chord of C6 because it still contains all the notes. Now if we play notes in a different order, so that would be called root position because the root note, the tonic note, the C is on the bottom, but we could play it there, or we could play it there, or we could play it there. These note voicings, as they're called, these are all pretty close together. Well, in fact, you can't get the notes any closer together than they are. So these chord voicings are known as close position chords. Now, the example I showed before, where we spread out the chords, that is known as an open position chord voicing. These sound very good with ambient music in particular because they are more open. And another thing to bear in mind, depending on the sort of music you're producing and the sounds you are using. So I'm just going to play a C chord here. And we can hear what that is. It's getting a little bit on the low end for ambient music perhaps. But if we play it even further down, that sounds really muddy. It's very hard to hear the individual notes. But if we spread this out, it sounds much better. It's much more recognisable. It's more open. Bonus tip, if you like, when you create ambient chords, you don't always have to create them in a close position like this or a root position. In fact, you can spread them over the keyboard, which would make them sound even more ambient. Right, so let's move on to chord number 2, which is the minor 7 chord. So, as you might have guessed, this is a minor chord with an added 7th. So, let's use A minor as an example. So, A, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, there's our A minor chord, and we add the 7th to it. And again, this is a nice sort of gentle, soft ambient sound. Now, I know what you might be thinking, especially if you have a little bit of a knowledge about chords, that these are the notes in the A minor 7 chord. So let's rearrange them. What do we have? Well, we have an A, we have a C, we have an E, and we have a G. Golly gosh, this is the same chord as the C6 chord, isn't it? Well, technically, it may well be so. Now, I'm interrupting this presentation as a form of public service because in the video, I went into great detail about why the same notes could be considered as 2 different chords. So 3 hours later, I thought, no, this is too long. So I've cut all that out. But basically, there are 2 main reasons. The first is the harmonic content, and the second is the bass note. Our ears tend to use the lowest note in a chord as the perceived root. So in that example, our ears would think this is a C chord of some description. If we rearrange the notes to put an A in the bass, then our ears would tend to think it was an A chord of some description. Now, there is a bit more to it than that. It also depends on the harmonic context, and that is a set of weeds which we don't really want to go into in this video. So yes, this has been the short explanation of why things like that happen. It's music theory. Why use one name when 7 will do? Don't worry about it. Just carry on, follow along, and you will be all right. Back to the plot. You may well be familiar with this one. This is a major 7 chord. So again, using our scale of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we are using a C major with a 7th note on top. And this is a classic ambient chord. It's just soft and floaty and dreamy. It's used in a lot of hip-hop and lo-fi and jazz music like that. And if we look at the chord, again, we have C, of course, but we also have this other chord, which is an E minor. So again, we are combining a major and a minor chord, and this really softens the shall we say, the harder edged effect of a pure major chord. It makes it more ambient. So chord, what are we on to? This is chord 4, and this is a very simple chord, but one I absolutely love. This is the add 9 chord. So when we were counting up from 1, we got to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we can keep going to 9. So the first chord we're going to look at is a major add 9, and this is simply the major chord with an added 9th. Now this is one of my favourite chords, the added 9th chord, and it again takes the edge off the pure majorness of the major chord. Now I know the astute among you may be thinking, well, okay, that's 9, but it's a D, and D is the same as the second note in the scale, so what's going on here? Well, we call it a major add 9 because we are in fact adding the 9th note of the scale. Now you will very occasionally come across a chord which is described as a major chord with an add 2. So if that were the case, then we would play the major chord and add the second note. Now I have to say I think that sounds quite nice as well. We have a bit of a note cluster here, 3 notes all grouped together. Now this is obviously going to sound different depending on what sound you are using. Let me just switch to Polymax, which I think was given away free with a Cubase update. This is a nice sort of pad sound. Let's try the add 9 first. That's a really nice smooth ambient chord. And let's try the add 2. So I think that works, but obviously depending on what you're using, that may or may not be quite as mellow. But this is a super easy way to make a major chord more ambient. Just add the 9. And the second add 9 chord, you can probably guess what it is. It's going to be the minor add 9 chord. Now since we're playing with C, let us play C minor. That's C minor. Let's throw in the 9. Now this is probably my favourite chord in the world. I think this has a very poignant sound. And I made an entire video about it if you want to look at that. In the key of A minor, there's the 9, that's the B. And I think that is just a wonderful, lovely, it's a very melancholy sound if you want to. Maybe a little touch of dark with your ambient music, then the minor add 9 chord is just a super chord to use. So we're on to chord 6, and this is an interesting one. Just before we get into it, I want to say a few words about major and minor chords. Now all the chords which we're going to look at here are not purely straightforward major or minor chords. You can of course use straightforward major and minor chords in ambient music, but as I mentioned earlier, we generally want to be a bit more subtle about it. We don't want to bash people over the head with a solid major or a solid minor chord. So one way to do that is to play a chord which is neither major nor minor. So we have a C major chord and we have a C minor chord. Now again, for beginners, what makes a chord major or minor depends entirely on the third. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the third, it's this note which determines whether the chord is major or minor. So our major third is 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones up from the root, and the minor third is 1, 2, 3 semitones up from the root. So we'll use this information in the next two chords. So the 6th chord in the series is a suspended second, and C sus2 looks and sounds like this. Now if you listen to that, is that a major chord or is that a minor chord? Well, we don't know because there's no third in it. We don't know if it's a major chord or a minor chord. It's a wonderful ambient chord. Now, I did explain what a suspended chord was in a previous video, but in case you didn't see that, essentially, this is wonderful music theory, but the suspended chord takes the third and it suspends it. It can suspend it up or it can suspend it down. So what I'm suggesting as a good chord is to suspend it down. So we are suspending it down to the 2nd. We can suspend it up to the 4th, in which case this would be known as a C sus4. And in fact, the sus4 is probably the more common of the suspended chords. Now, both suspended chords, well, they're not major or minor because they have no third, but both suspended chords, I think, want to resolve. And if we play this C sus4, I think this wants to resolve to, well, it wants to resolve to C. And you will have heard this. Many times before. This is a bonus chord, this sus4. If you hold on to this chord for long enough, as you're probably going to do in ambient music, then your ear will accept it for what it is and probably not expect it to resolve. However, the sus2 chord, now again, this does want to resolve. That was a nice resolution, but it's not as strong a pull as the sus4. So I think the sus2, it's equally ambiguous because we haven't got a third, but I don't think it pulls so much towards a resolution. So it is just as easy to use as the sus4 and possibly even more ambiguous and floating and ambient. The 7th, I think this is chord 7, this is the last one which we are going to look at, and bearing in mind the fact that we need a third in a chord to tell us whether it is a major chord or minor chord, we can play a chord without any third at all. Well, we have done with the sus chord, but there is another chord which is commonly referred to as the power chord, which ignores the third entirely. So in C, that would just be C and G, and quite often the root note is doubled on top. So that is a nice open chord. The notes are spread out. There's no third, major, minor. What is that? Well, we don't know because there's no third to tell us. So that is a really nice, big, open, ambient chord. Now, it's called a power chord because guitarists, if you play this on a guitar, it sounds awesome. But it works very, very well for ambient music. Now let's see if I can put these together to create some sort of ambient music. Now I don't want to give you a 30-minute piece of ambient music. This is just a demonstration of how you can use the chords to move from one chord to another. So it's going to be slightly compressed and condensed. I will use the principles of voice leading to create smooth chord transitions. I went into this in some detail in the video about creating ultra smooth ambient chords. Check that out if you haven't seen it already. So to create the chords, I'm going to use another free plugin called Zyclops. I made a little video which included this as a freebie, but I shall leave a link to this separately in the description as well. So this makes a sound like which is a nice paddy ambient type sound. Right, I can't say I'm going to use all 7 of these chords, but let's see how many we can squeeze in legitimately into a short piece of ambient music. So let's start with the C, the power chord, C5 as it is commonly known. It only consists of 2 notes, but if I'm using this, I like to put an octave above. So let's say this is a C5. You could add an octave lower down like that, and you could even add another 5th. That's a nice big open ambient sounding pad, and that's got a bit of a release on it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to use these 3 notes here in the middle of the keyboard. So this is our starting position. Where can we go from here? Now, using the principles of a smooth voice leading, which means moving as few notes, as few steps as possible, let's move this up to the D. So this gives us a C sus2. Now, where can we go from here? What about a major 7? So if we move this up to the E, and I'm going to add 2 more notes in place of this G. So this gives us an F major 7. It's slightly open, the C is down here rather than up there. So F major 7. What now? Well, we're only 1 note away from D minor 7. So if I move this note down to the D, that is a D minor 7. However, I'm not going to do that exactly. What I'm going to do, I'm going to move this down to the C, and I'm going to move the C up to the D. I just think it creates a better progression, as it were. So where to now? Let's see if we can squeeze in the add 9. I love the add 9. Going to move a few notes here, but let's see if we skip these down there and skip this one down there. That is our A minor add 9 super chord, and from there 1 more. Well, let's try a major 6, which started this whole process. I want a G major 6, so that would be a G major 6. How can we get there? Well, we move that down there. This is okay, but we need to move that up. So that is G major 6. Can we do? That's the smoothest way to move. And that sounds quite nice. And if you wanted to loop this or start again, we could move from here back to our C5, C power chord. There are the chords, and I did put them together to create a short piece of music. I used Cubase's chord detection function to label the chords. It can't do a couple of them. It can't do power chords, can't do C5, so I've just left that as C. It also can't do the add 9 chord. It labelled the A minor add 9 as an A minor 9, which is slightly different. Maybe near enough for jazz, as they say. Just point these out in case somebody picks me up on them. I've doubled the chords on the Cyclops and Polymax and used Alicia's electric keys to add a little bit of topping on top of them. I've also added some Foley, some restaurant sounds, just to give it a bit of an atmosphere. And of course, it is drenched in reverb. So there you go, a short example. I hope you found this interesting, useful, perhaps a little bit inspiring. If you would like more advanced chords, because there are dozens of them that you could use in ambient music, let me know and I'll think about making another video with even more chords. If you want more information about how to create your own ambient music, check out the list in the description and then go make some. But before you do, if you have found this video useful, there's a big subscribe button and a thumbs up button just below this video. Would be incredibly helpful and so much appreciated if you would like to click both or either. In any event, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it and we'll see you in the next video.